I'm gonna wait for that truck to go by.
There's a little bit of road noise.
I'm waiting for the truck.
It's okay.
I'm waiting for the truck. Okay, the truck's gone. Welcome, everybody. Good evening. It's an evening to us. Might not be evening to you. Might be morning where you're listening at. Welcome to Leaky Waiters, not Waters, Waiters. Episode, I think we're on 5 or 6. I don't know. We're on episode something, teen. 6. I just got confirmation.
Mosquito edition.
Mosquito edition. They're not bugging me. They're not bugging me. I'm sorry they're bugging you. There's some spray over
light
there.
right in front of my face.
We're broadcasting to you from the great outdoors here in Morgan County, Utah. I'm Cole Larson. I'm joined here tonight with KISS Army Second Lieutenant James Young. Since 1979, mind you.
KISS Army.
KISS Army. There you go. You got the tongue going. How you doing, James?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Dude, I'm doing great.
Man, I'm kind of glad we're out here. I mean, we're on somebody's property. I guess it's the county's or something.
This is my property.
We just sitting out here in the trees and doing a little talking and just kind of enjoying the evening.
We're sitting here by a van down by the river. Down by the river.
Oh, my God, we really are.
We
really
really
are.
are.
Right.
Yeah, the river's like right over there. There's a van.
Yeah, we got Tam Van here.
You know, this
yeah.
van kind of bothers me. I'm surprised there's not like a free candy sign on the side of it or something.
Well,
in
we
the back.
It's on the other side.
used to keep the candy in those little pockets right there that you can
Oh,
see.
yeah.
So yeah, there's probably some in there.
Is there
And
really?
it's free if you can find it. Yeah.
I bet it would be free.
Don't eat Van Pocket candy.
That kind of reminds me of a famous cookie we were discussing earlier. We're not going to talk about that.
Famous Amos. So
I don't think it was Famous Amos.
Famous Amos makes a fine cookie, but that's another story for another time. Also joined with us here by the banks of the Weber River in Morgan County, Utah. The man making the magic happen, so to speak. And I'm not talking about that. Get your mind out of the gutter. Mr. Brandon Long, how are you doing this evening, sir?
Oh, I'm doing great, thanks. I'm producing. I thought you were going to totally took me off guard.
I thought your head was down. I'm like, now's my chance.
Yeah.
Yeah. You guys look good on camera, by the way. I can see
Oh,
up your
wow.
shorts, so that's pretty awesome.
Hey,
Yeah.
Hey, man. Where'd you get that little
got a
robin?
little looky-loo there. Woo-hoo! I thought I felt the draft. Well, now you got me all paranoid about my skills.
Better to have you paranoid than excited.
Don't act like you're not impressed.
No, really not.
So James is here, Brandon's here, I'm here, also here. Welcome back, Paul Burnett, good friend.
Thanks.
How are you?
Happy to be here. And you realize we're sitting here
That's a
listening to trucks drive by next to the river, talking about fly fishing at the perfect time to be fishing, and we're not fishing.
Seems a little ridiculous.
It
doesn't
does
it?
feel. It seems a little absurd.
That's all right. But you know, sometimes you just got to take a break from the fish and sit around and just kind of shoot the breeze.
Sometimes
and just kinda,
we got to take some stuff
Yeah,
serious.
you gotta-
So
you gotta-
yeah,
There's actually somebody fishing
there is.
like
there's-
30 yards away.
We can see him.
Yeah, he's
He's been fishing for a couple hours actually.
But you know, you talk about times to be serious, Paul. This isn't it.
No way, man.
You know us.
Hope you
I
left
do,
your
I do.
Syrians pants at the house. And put them in the washing machine. You can get them on when you get home. Right now, no serious pants.
So you're saying that he's pantsless?
I'm saying
He's got
his-
the cargo shorts on.
he's-
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Okay, let's
I do actually. Yeah, that's great.
Okay, cargo shorts get a lot of hate, and I don't understand it.
So do
It's-
cargo.
it's
Maybe
like-
it's because I wear fucking
It's
cargo
the
shorts.
cargo shorts with the dad shoes, the white
White New Balance.
the white New Balance
Yeah.
is the issue. Yeah, white New Balance and cargo shorts. But
Cargo
you
shorts.
got like some Salomons and you're good.
Cargo shorts are great.
Yeah.
I
What
like 'em.
can you carry in your cargo shorts?
What can I carry? I can tell you right now. I got this. Kill a mosquito real quick. I got this bottle opener, and it's got a line cutter on it. These are functional. I'm
It's survival
digging
tools.
survival.
Yeah.
I'm like Bear Grylls. I'm like that Les Strouds on the Survivor Mans.
Bear Grylls. You're like Bear Grylls. So you're saying that you drink your own pee?
I'm saying I would pretend to for money.
Yeah, but if there was enough of it, you would.
How much money are we talking here? It's sterile, and I like the taste of it.
How about like $9.95?
$9.95 million
Dollars.
dollars.
I would say just drink beer.
$10 is $10. Well, I mean,
Safe water.
Budweiser's not
Fair.
too far off from that,
Yeah.
right? Speaking of beer, we're drinking a few things tonight here. So currently, at this very moment, I've got in my hand a Utah Brewing Company, John Paul Porter. These guys are right out of Ogden, Utah. I just discovered they existed today.
Today?
I'd never heard of it before, and I live in Ogden, and I drink beer. Like, how big of a failure am I? That's
are
pretty good.
legit. There's some good beer. Their brewery's right near Linquist Field, actually, overlooks the field. So
That's-
right on Grant. It's some pretty good beer.
Well, didn't you say you ate there earlier today? They have a little
Yeah.
restaurant diner in
Yeah,
there or
my-
something?
My wife and I celebrated our anniversary today, and
Okay, wait.
Wait,
Ate
this
lunch.
is your
This
anniversary
is your anniversary, and you're not here sitting with a van by the river talking to us.
with these degenerates.
this is
these
how
two
serious
degenerates.
this is how serious I am about this podcast. So
God,
pressure's on, guys.
there is no pressure.
So you're gonna let your
Serious?
see now I'm conflicted because I'm like, okay, his wife's gonna want to listen to this, not only because he's here, but
No, she's
because
not.
what were you doing on our anniversary? And you're gonna be like, this is what I was doing.
You went out and hung out with
And-
those guys.
I'm going to Morgan County.
Morgan County.
You like how I did that?
You're the
Morgan.
only person who went to Morgan County for their anniversary.
It's actually not our anniversary today, but we
Oh,
celebrated
good,
it
because
today.
I legit like felt honored and
Yeah.
bad at the same time.
You kidding me? What a perfect opportunity.
What's the opportunity,
Oh, we can mess with him all night and make fun of his wife and everything.
dude? I
should
don't
take you
know.
out. It's not- whatever.
Like,
There's a river right there.
No, but you're right. Kind of honored, that you come and spend the time with us, and instead of your bride, and
I mean, I feel good enough even just any day.
yeah.
You want to come and hang out with us, even if it's not your anniversary. So thank you for being here.
Well, I
Paul.
appreciate that. I'm,
Well,
I'm happy to be here. honestly.
Happy anniversary.
Thanks.
So in case you guys don't know who Paul is, maybe some of you do. He's been on the Bug Huck. He was on the Bug Hucker show a few times in the past, I believe. He's the first time here on Leaky Waders. You haven't been with us since we started the new show up. But Paul, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and why you're, an expert.
So
In life in general.
Yeah.
So my name is Paul Burnett. I work for Trout Unlimited. We're a nonprofit organization. I think probably a lot of the listeners of this podcast have heard of us. But I direct our water and habitat program in Utah, and also run our Weber River restoration program. So we've done in the state. We've been involved in about 90 projects across the whole state. About 30 of those have been in the Weber River, and so the Weber River is a really important fishery for the anglers here, and also for native fish. And so we've been doing a lot of things, fish passage type projects and habitat restoration in the basin. So yeah, I've got quite a few projects that I've been involved with.
I know that I've been told in the past that the complexities and the challenges that are faced on the Weber River are probably the most complex and difficult to deal with at times in the state. Would you agree with that?
I would agree. In fact, there's one of the guys who oversees all the water rights in the Weber commented that he thought that the Weber River was probably the most complex in the entire West.
In the entire West.
So yeah, not only fisheries but also water. It's a huge issue, and we're not going to have to deal with it this year, but last year was a huge challenge for water.
Yeah, we've got some good snow this year, and I'm looking over at the river right now, and it's flowing high. The water looks good.
Amazing.
It looks good.
It
It's
looks
not
amazing.
like chocolate milk
Right.
anymore. It looks great, and I kind of wish I packed some gear with me, but yeah, it's looking great. So glad to hear that we're not dealing with all of those issues this year is much. Hopefully we can have more years like this to come. But so the meat and the potatoes behind tonight's episode, it's something that I've wanted to discuss for quite some time, and I'm glad that Paul's finally here so we can talk about it, because I've been saving this for you specifically. So we've got this spreadsheet. Okay. What's that?
Oh, snap. You got a
Oh, snap.
spreadsheet? Yeah.
Oh, where I got
snap. Yeah.
I'm gonna talk to you about my spreadsheets.
So wait, you actually have a plan? Is that what
Oh,
you're
dude,
saying?
we have a Google sheet. Believe it or not, this shit show is
Spreadsheet.
coordinated.
Yeah, spreadsheets work really well on podcasts.
Yeah. But we do have a spreadsheet. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but we got a list of stuff we want to talk about, issues, topics. This has been like, boom, number one on my list in my heart of hearts. But I wanted to save it because I knew that you could bring some valuable content to the table. So I appreciate you being here with us tonight. So with that being said, we're going to talk about brown trout.
Brown trout.
Salmo.
Salmo Truto.
Salmo.
It's close.
Salmo
Not
Truto.
Truto.
It's good enough.
Trotta.
Salmo
Trotta?
Trotta?
Trotta.
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 Salmo trotta.
Is that Latin for something?
For brown trout.
Yeah.
It's Latin
Brown
for
trout.
trout.
Yeah,
Trout of
actually,
the browns.
I haven't even looked that up. It is Latin. That's the scientific names are Latin.
Trotta.
But
Truto.
salmo probably stands for salmon and trout.
Okay, so right off
Salmon
the bat,
trout.
is a brown trout is considered to be in the char family or the salmon side?
Oh,
Because we've had arguments about is it a distinct or a distant relative of a char, or is it actually in the salmonoid?
okay. So, it's a trout.
We're getting serious.
It's a trout. Char. So here's your defining characteristics. Char are typically dark bodies, light spots. Trout, light bodies, dark spots.
So the ring on the spots on the brown don't affect it. It's like a white ring, blue dot instead of being a blue ring, white dot kind of thing.
I would say the whole body is
body looks like
lighter
a-
compared to the.
so-
So the brown trout have the dark spots.
Dark spots. So it's actually going to be in the salmonoid family then. Hence
Yeah,
salmo.
well, they're all in the salmon family.
Okay, but it's
But
not.
they're different. They're different genuses or
Okay.
genera, I guess.
That's
but
genuses,
Okay.
James. Not
Genuses?
that other thing.
Genuses.
Geniuses.
Man,
Genes.
my
Some
mind
of
was
us-
just a running. Okay,
but,
so
no, but they're all there's three branches. So there's the salmo, and then there's the Oncorhynchus, which is the salmon trout of the western U.S.
Mhm.
And then there's the Salvelinus, which is the brook trout, bull trout. Those are the chars.
Okay, so a brown trout.
Salvelinus.
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 Okay.
So is brown trout related to brown chicken, brown cow, or?
That only occurs in October. Okay, you come out here to the river and all you hear is brown chicken, brown
Thanks.
trout.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for breaking up the
Yeah,
scientific
no,
jargon there.
Okay. Well, that's just been a long-standing
Yeah.
argument at the shop. Is this in a char family or is it in the salmonoid family? And it's like, okay, so you've explained that.
So
Thank you.
yeah, they're all in the same family, but
Okay.
they're different branches of that.
Okay.
Technically, you're all right.
Yeah, that's right. That's true.
That's what I'm gathering here. Okay. See, and I'd also heard that the way you can kind of, and this apparently probably is totally false, how you can distinguish is the time of year they spawn. Fall versus spring. Does that have anything to do with it?
Well, no, that's not necessarily because there are the steelhead will spawn later in the summer into the fall, and then also some of the salmon will actually like kokanee or sockeye will spawn in the fall. So so spawning time doesn't really factor into the taxonomy. It's more of a lot of it is where they originated. So the salmo generally came from Europe. The Oncorhynchus is generally western U.S. Trout, and then the Salvelinus is generally eastern and up in the Arctic. The exception there is bull trout, which is a western species. But
Whole nother topic on bull trout.
yeah,
Now that I'm totally confused, let's go back to talking about just brown trout, salmo truta.
Salmo.
Trotta.
that's good.
Salmo trotta.
Salmo trotta.
Trotta.
If you want to be real fancy, you could impress your friends, make them think you're smart. You'd say Salmo trotta.
I've tried before and they know better.
Yeah, mine
Yeah,
do
they're
too.
just-
They're
just
like,
kinda like,
shut
yeah,
up.
yeah.
Just say it in German, and then you're
You-
good.
Okay, so German. Let's talk about that for a
Let's do it.
second
Yeah.
here. German, we're talking about origins of fish. Sorry, cough. Origins of fish, where are they coming from? Whenever I hear somebody say, oh, you caught a German brown, that's a German brown, it always just like makes my eye twitch a little bit. And I'm like, it just, I don't know what it is. Something about that just bothers me because it's like, I don't think you, let's talk about that. Okay, is there such a thing as a German brown versus a Scottish brown versus a whatever American brown versus,
Yeah, I think in Europe, for sure.
we don't care
you
about
could,
Europe.
You could think of brown trout. So brown trout are native to Europe, right? And in Europe, they're very similar to they're managed similar to cutthroat trout here, and so the different regions and different drainage basins are going to have unique brown trout populations. So there is something to the German brown name, but when you get here and you catch a fish that looks a specific way, and you say, "Oh yeah, it's a German brown," you can't tell. They're by the time they get here, that all those different sources have been mixed, and it's kind of like rainbow trout. You know, you just don't know where the origin of those fish are.
Okay, so you heard it here. Facebook people, next time I see one of you on a page say, "Ooh, that's a big German brown," and I think that's how people, if it's big, it's a German brown. I'm going to call you out on it, because Paul told me, and he's an expert in this. He went to school. He knows this.
I'm a learned man.
He's a learned doctor of fish. I don't know if he's a doctor, but
Master.
he's a learned man. He's a learned master of fish, which sounds cooler than doctor.
Pretty close. Yeah.
If you ask me. No, you're full of shit. And just because your fish is big, that's cool, but it doesn't make it a German brown.
You know, a lot of times I think we see
get
at
off
the
his
shop at guys,
horse.
you know, folks who have been here in Utah, deep family roots here, and that it came from generations down. That's how great granddad referred to them. And you see, you know, with us at the shop, we see folks that are older, more advanced in age. We'll refer to them as German browns, where the younger crowd are just brown trout. But I think you just see it as a generational deal, is that they learn it from my dad and my granddad down the road, and that's how they refer to it in the family, so that just kind of keeps rolling. But you don't see many younger guys, or I haven't seen younger guys saying those are Germans. It's always the older dudes.
I'll see people try to like argue it though.
Yeah,
Like,
oh,
no,
yeah.
it's a German brown, and here's why, because the spot looks like.
Yeah,
No.
and I've heard stuff about the size of the blue on the cheek
Yeah,
and stuff.
yeah.
It's like, nah, that's just whatever. It's like
Yeah.
the size of your nose, or just color your hair or something, right?
It's like trying to identify a Yellowstone cutthroat trout versus a Bonneville. I mean, can you really identify, if you put a Yellowstone versus a Bonneville next to each other, could you really identify them? Probably not.
I'm not a learned man such as yourself, but I can't. To me, they're just
Yeah,
cutthroat.
probably not, because really they look so similar. I mean, you could do some serious analysis of each fish, but really it's the basin that they came from that really identifies what they are.
So it's from
And-
like a very genetic.
It is.
They've got to have fishancestry.com send in fish spit in order to figure out, you
How it
know,
goes.
if they're 3% Iberian trout or
Exactly.
if they're 18%, you know, Eurasian, whatever
Yeah.
funky term you want to use. Okay.
Well, then, off the side note, like the Bear River Cut versus the Bonneville, isn't it like just a few genes off or something? They're pretty close related. I mean, as far as the genetic wise on them.
Yeah, I mean they're really similar, and you know the geneticists have been able to identify specific genetic characteristics that they can kind of separate those out. But to be honest, I mean they are so
They
similar.
look so close. They really,
Yeah,
they really do.
yeah.
You know, when I did both times I did the cut slam, you kind of look at it and go, these all
Which
look this.
one was which?
Yeah, they all look kind of look the same.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, but from what everybody said, this drainage is this fish and that drainage is that one.
And that's important because those fish have been there for thousands of years, and
Yeah.
and they've adapted to those little streams that they live in that
Yeah.
have been flowing
So
for
like,
thousands of
so like
years.
on the brown trout, when were browns first introduced to the U.S. ish? You know, pretty close.
You know, probably in the mid to late 1800s is when they were initially established here. The browns in Utah were established because most of our cutthroat trout fisheries, which are native, they were fished out because they provided, you know, really important food supplies for the pioneers, and they needed a way to reestablish those fisheries, and you know, there was kind of we already knew how to raise brown trout in the hatchery, and so they were you know a reliable stock of fish that they could bring into the systems to replenish the fisheries. They didn't understand at the time what, you know, sort of impacts they would have on native fish
So
populations.
so are browns still stocked in Utah? Do they still have hatcheries for brown trout stocking?
Yeah, they are still stocked in the state. Not as much as even 15 years ago. Most of the stocking has been reduced just because of the fact that, you know, biologists are recognizing the fact that brown trout do have a negative impact on a lot of the native fish populations, and so you know, I have to give a lot of credit to the Division of Wildlife. They've been doing a lot of research on trying to find ways to provide that sport fishing opportunity in a way that doesn't you know, have a huge negative impact on some of the native fish.
So with brown trout, I know that technically they are considered an invasive species, at least on some lists. That's correct, right?
Oh yeah, they're. So you asked me for this episode. Are brown trout invasive? I think it was the question. I think the bigger question is how invasive are they, and they're pretty invasive, and it really depends on the drainage basin. There's a lot of different characteristics that kind of set places up to be really at risk of invasion from brown trout, where there are some places that they're not as much of an issue.
Okay, so what are some of the characteristics of brown trout specifically that makes them invasive? What kind of impact do they have on native fish populations, and what is the threat?
So one of the things that brown trout are really good at is they're what we call generalists, right? So they are pretty adaptable to living in a lot of different scenarios. They can deal with a little bit warmer temperatures than some of our native trout, which haven't had to deal with really warm temperatures. They're also one of the really interesting things about brown trout is the fact that they are they're main stem spawners and they are fall spawners. So they'll spawn in the main stem of rivers, and they spawn in the fall. And a lot of our rivers have been pretty the hydrograph, how the water changes over the season, has been changed pretty dramatically by dams. And if you look at the Ogden River, for example, the most suitable flow for brown trout, especially for spawning, is in the fall. There's a minimum flow out of the bottom of the dam is nice and warm, relatively speaking, in the winter, and it's clean because the reservoirs trap all the sediment, and so because they spawn in the fall, they are really successful in pulling off really good year classes. Every time they spawn, 90 to 95% of the eggs that they put in the gravel make it to being little fish. That
90
fry.
to 95%.
Yeah.
How does that
some
compare
estimates
to other brown trout in other rivers, and also just other trout in general? Because I know it's typically a lot lower than that, right?
So yeah, and it really depends on that hydrograph. So what's really interesting about tailwater fisheries like the Ogden River, like the Provo below Jordanelle, they really act in a similar way to spring-fed systems. And so if you go to Europe, in their native basins, the populations that are doing really well are in these spring-fed systems, these naturally stable hydrographs with relatively warm water. And in the winter, relatively warm is just above freezing, but that's still enough for those eggs to really survive well. Where they're struggling is rivers where there's a little bit more flashy hydrograph, there's a little bit more snow melt at the right time that wipes out year classes. And so and in fact, that's a concern in Europe for a lot of the fisheries managers there, is there's some of those flashy hydrographies, those brown trout populations are actually really struggling. So in Utah, where we have these really stable flows in the winter, our brown trout populations just skyrocket.
Are they impacted at all by our spring runoff season? Am I off here, Brandon? Sorry, I just couldn't hear anything. Wondered if I kicked something. Anyways, back to what I was saying. Are brown trout really all that impacted by spring runoff season and the high water? Or is it like the eggs are already hatched, it's a done deal at that point?
So they are, and that's what's really interesting. The Logan River is a really good example of that. James, you were talking about that earlier. So in the Logan River, there's this zone around Twin Bridges, if you're familiar with Logan Canyon, where the fish population kind of converts from brown trout dominated to cutthroat dominated, and that's really where that's at the point where the runoff coincides with when those eggs or the fish are coming out of the redds. And so that's that vulnerable time period for the brown trout is right when they're emerging from redds. And if there's a high water event, if that coincides with that, then you start seeing impacts to the population. It reduces the number of juvenile fish that are able to make it into the fishable size. So yes, runoff does affect that, and that's where we see these rivers with natural hydrography are still pretty resistant to brown trout invasion.
So like the Ogden River, where it's a tailwater out of Pineview Dam, that water doesn't get bumped up until later in the spring generally.
Right.
So if they were to kick that up earlier in the spring, probably when it's still frozen, would that then reduce the number of brown trout that are successfully hatched and grow to, fry or whatever each year?
That's exactly something that we've been looking at. And in fact, 2017 was a perfect example of that. There was I don't know if you remember that, but in mid-January, the water managers started to kind of panic a little bit because there was a ton of snow up in the mountains and Pineview was full. And so they started releasing about 1,200 CFS of water out of Pineview Dam. And that was perfect timing for, something that we've been talking about for a long time, is like if we can time a flood to happen right at the right time, the brown trout, the juvenile brown trout coming out of the eggs, out of the reds, could be basically wiped out. And that sounds kind of nasty, but that's actually not a bad thing, for brown trout, because in the Ogden River, there are so many of those juvenile fish that they eat everything. And so you get a lot of those juvenile fish. You get fish that make it through the next year, which grow okay, and then after that, because there are so many of them, you get a few fish that are maybe larger than 12 inches, maybe a couple that are 14 or so. Those fish are about 4 to 5 years old, and that's kind of the max growth that we see, except for a couple places in the Ogden River. And I think some of those bigger fish that we see in the Ogden are probably actually coming out of the Weber.
So like when you hit that big flow, when they come out of the eggs, does it kill them, or does it just flush them downstream, down out of the canyon, down into the flats?
It probably kills a decent number of them. I mean, they just don't have so when fish are coming right out, when juvenile fish are coming right out of the reds, which are basically just pits that the fish dig in the riverbed, they don't have a good ability to swim. And so if water velocity is faster than they can swim, they're just going to be swept downstream. Typically, what we saw this year with all the perch and the crappie in the Ogden River.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of the same scenario. They'll just kind of get swept down. They don't do very well, and they'll kind of get smashed and.
Like in 17, when we were talking about that when we first got out here today, was fished it the summer before. We were standing on sandbars, bunch of silt and everything, and then on Memorial Day they dumped the flows way down, went out and fished, and where I'd been in silt before, it was all just real pretty cobble rock. Everything was just cleaned out and scoured and stuff. And then we started rolling rocks just to see bugs, and there was so much more more bugs under the rocks and stuff. So it seemed like it really made the river healthy, because there's better bug life, less fish, but they were growing bigger, and we're seeing bigger fish this year.
Are you really?
Yeah,
that's interesting.
We've seen some bigger fish come out of that now.
So we're 2 years on from that high water event. That's something that we talked about a lot several years ago. We haven't really been able to look at that population level in the Ogden River, but we saw, it was interesting, back in the 80s there was a chemical spill in the Ogden River, and it killed a whole year class of brown trout. And then like 5 years later, the Division of Wildlife went in and sampled, and there were just loads of huge brown trout in the river. So it's pretty interesting to think about. I think one of the things we talk about is, do we need to harvest more brown trout? And I think that in some cases, yes, but we have to be careful about that, because if you're in a situation like the Ogden River, where you just have so many juvenile fish and you're harvesting the big fish, you're not really having the impact on the stage of fish that you want to. You want to impact those small fish and reduce the numbers of those small fish.
So what's kind of a good guideline then? I've been told that we can benefit from keeping the cookie cutters, sort of. The stuff you see the most of. Would you agree with that?
In some places, I would agree with that. I think that that's it's a good guideline for anglers, but I think it is a little more complicated than that. And I think that it's really important to understand where the sensitive life stage is, and where the fact that even if you take a big fish out, are you really going to make room for more big fish? The question is understanding the population dynamics and understanding where that bottleneck for that population is. And for a lot of our tailwaters, it's actually those fish that are 1 to 2 years old. When they're starting to get bigger, they're just not able to find that larger food supply because there's just so many of those fish.
So we should keep the little dink ones?
You should keep the dink ones, and you should.
Oh man!
But I think there's
Gotta
a
fillet
4
those
fish
out.
limit or something like that.
Get a couple nuggets.
So basically, what's coming down to is the number of fish are exceeding the carrying capacity of that river for a healthy ecosystem.
Well,
there's only so much food in there.
It's healthy for them, but for our fishery, it's a
Yeah.
little bit different. We want the bigger fish, right?
Yeah,
And so if we want to meet those objectives, we kind of need to look at not only the adult fish, but we want to look at what's happening at that earlier
Early
life
stage.
stage where people aren't fishing.
and this kind of falls
For
back,
those.
so it ties into like a flaming gorge or trying with the Laker pups, the
Mm-hmm.
smaller Lakers. Hey, we have so many. If we thin this out, we can keep our bigger fish will get better, and we still, it's the same thing. They're eating all the food source, all the little guys. There's so many of them. There's not enough for the bigger fish to eat.
Yeah,
It's
that's really it.
carrying capacity.
Yep, that's really it.
Yeah.
It's really difficult when you get those fish that you can't catch on fishing gear though, and so that's where we really need to start looking at other potential options for changing the structure of those populations.
Okay, so how big will a fish grow in a year? I mean, you're sitting there doing this, the little guys. Is this a year? Is this a 1-year-old fish? I mean,
so
That's what she said.
so brown
it's
brown
a 10
trout.
incher.
So brown trout, they're coming out of reds in the spring, and so by the end of the summer, the first year fish that first year fish are usually about 4 inches.
Okay.
You go the second year, and you're looking at about 8 to 10 inch fish. So those are 1.5-year-old fish.
Okay.
So typically with brown trout, what's really interesting is they will convert over from eating invertebrates, some bugs, to fish when they get to be about 12 inches. And so if there's a good diverse prey supply of fish of minnows and that sort of thing in the river, then they can convert over to that and grow really quickly after that. They can also eat the bigger macroinvertebrates. So what ends up happening though is when you have a ton of those, when you have like 4,000 of those 7 to 8 inch fish per mile, they're eating all of the bugs that they can see, and so all that larger food supply is just not available for the bigger fish. What we also see is, especially in tailwaters like below Pineview, below Rockport Reservoir, all of those native minnows, the dace and the shiners and stuff like that, they're gone. They've been all eaten by the huge numbers of brown trout. So there isn't a fish resource for them to eat, and they apparently don't eat each other. So that's why we end up with that kind of natural stunted population. But so you look into that balance of, okay, if we harvest more of those big fish, what does that really do? Does that really release resources? Kind of, but there's not really any big fish to take that role. It's more in that medium to small size fish that really need to be removed from the system.
So how do you remove them? I mean, if you go through, say, the Ogden, and go, hey, look, we're going to come in here and we're going to remove a number of the 1 to 1.5-year-old age class. They're hard to catch for anglers. No one's going to keep a whole bunch of 4-inch fish. You only keep 4.
Right.
I mean, so how do you go through and remove them? Do you do shock studies and net them and remove them that way? Do you do I hate to say it, a rotodone treatment?
Yeah.
Do you do gill nets?
So shock studies would be really, really difficult, and really, I mean, there'd be a lot of labor involved with that. So really, the thing is trying to work with water users and trying to find a way to get that to target that really sensitive life stage, which is when those fish are coming right out of the reds.
So we need to
we need that winter
replicate
flood.
the
Yeah.
2017
Yeah.
flood. We need to do that.
That was awesome.
I know
we
you
all
were-
know how how water is, especially in this state, and that's a hot issue. And getting people to agree to dump water out at a time of year when they don't need it, good luck, Paul.
Or if there was actually water.
that's a
Yeah, we're
rough
working
one.
on that. That's good. We're there.
Yeah, but like this year on Pineview, there was nothing to dump. It was way low. I mean, it was like 30-something% full.
earlier.
Yeah.
They couldn't flush
Now
out.
it's overflowing, but
That's overflowing, but
that's
yeah, I mean,
where
that's
we're
just-
late in that game. So
Yeah, so
brown trout, they're really adaptive to a multitude of conditions that maybe other trout can't tolerate. So that's one thing that's challenging, is they grow really well in a diverse set of conditions, and then they just outcompete for food. Are there any other specific things that brown trout bring to the table that impact native species, not just cutthroat trout, but other fish as well?
Yeah, I mean, so like I mentioned, brown trout, they will convert over to a fish diet at a smaller size than, say, cutthroat trout. And so if you look in, for example, we're sitting here on the Weber, so we might as well talk about the Weber River. But if you're thinking about the Weber River and the fact that these other native fish that live in the Weber have adapted to larger cutthroat trout eating them and being able to hide from them, that sort of thing, they haven't had a chance to adapt to these smaller fish that are predatory on fish. And so there's more of them, so that does pose a kind of a concerning threat on some of the native fish. But where we do see, but I think it is tied to the numbers of those brown trout too. So like if you go below Rockport Reservoir, there's the brown trout population in there is off the charts, and there really aren't any native fish. You go below Echo, which has that winter flow issue that we've talked about, which is actually pretty detrimental to brown trout, which somewhat benefits the native fish because we do see those year class failures. We do see reds drying in that reach of the Weber, and so we don't have all those fish. You go down here, we're down in the Hennepin to Taggart Reach, and there's a lot of pretty big brown trout. That's because of that. I think that's because of the fact that there isn't that stable flow over the winter, and there is probably not as high of success from egg to fry juvenile fish coming into the river. So
Yeah, this thing like freezes up over there.
Yeah,
in a lot of
exactly.
spots.
So that's actually, I hate to say that, but that's actually to the benefit of the native fish, because this is actually a stronghold for the bluehead sucker that we've talked about, which is a really important sucker species in the Weber.
Okay, can we back up just a sec? You said earlier that when the browns convert over to meat eaters,
Yep.
that they won't eat themselves. I mean, will a 1.5-year-old brown eat the just hatching eggs? I mean, do they discriminate? I mean,
There's a little bit of that, but diet analyses don't really show a lot of cannibalism in trout species. I mean, there's a little bit, but it's not like this huge issue.
I think that's a common. I mean, I've always thought that, especially browns, they were very cannibalistic.
yeah, I thought they'd eat.
in
If
nature.
it was
So
a fish, they'd
that's
eat
really
it.
interesting to hear.
Yeah, it is. But they'll eat like the sculpins, the dace, the suckers, the sucker minnows, cutthroat minnows,
Yeah.
stuff like that. Plus
they
all
will.
your bigger bugs and things.
So one final question here for you, and kind of the whole point of this is native fish species. Why is it important that we look after these fish, and we're concerned about their future, and not just like, well, brown trout are cool, like why don't we just deal with that and survival of the fittest, screw the cutthroat? Like, why is it important that we care about them?
Well, we've been kind of trashing brown trout today, but I do want to say that.
They're invasive, man.
But brown
Although
trout,
they're cool, they're fun.
brown trout are pretty cool though.
Yeah.
And so before I get into the why we care about native fish, I do want to say that there are places where brown trout are appropriate, and especially in a lot of our really manipulated river systems, where conditions just aren't going to support the native fish, and that they provide a really important fishery, really important commercial value as well, right? So, I don't think anybody's advocating for, getting rid of brown trout everywhere. Nobody's been advocating for it in the Weber. What we've been trying to do in the Weber is we've been trying to manage for the native fish and allowing them to coexist with the browns. But we do. But we, some of us, a lot of us, hopefully, do care about the native fish, because those are fish that have been here for thousands of years. If you think about the Weber, the Colorado River, those are rivers that have been running for millions of years, and these fish have adapted.
I don't know where James went. I think he's taking a station
break.
Like, I think he did this last time.
This is like right at the serious time, right? It's like, oh my God.
I think he got nervous. What can we say?
But yeah. So, but no, these fish have been swimming in these waters for thousands of years, and they really represent this really unique. Every basin is unique. They have a unique fish assemblage, and they really represent this kind of a history of how fish have moved around the West, and we get into, especially up in northern Utah, into some of these rivers like the Weber and the Provo and the Bear, and the cutthroat trout that were here. They were a really important food source for the pioneers, and being able to preserve that genetic line, those fish, is it's really important. I think that it's when you start looking at those old photos of the railroad coming through, and think about the fact that was all cutthroat trout in the Weber River that was next to the railroad, and just think about the fact that we have the opportunity to still fish for those fish. They're 30 generations or how many generations after, and they're still here. And yeah, it's pretty amazing, and so it does prop up those fish as kind of priorities. But brown trout, people love catching brown trout, and so we don't want to be telling everybody we want to remove brown trout, but we want to find that balance.
So I agree, brown trout are, they're probably my favorite trout to catch, just because I remember when I was a kid, and I was fishing a lot of the little creeks and little ponds I had available to me, just right around, within a bike ride of my house. It was all rainbows. It was all planter, stock rainbows. And to catch a brown trout in a place, it was a bit more wily. It was neat, man. It was like, oh, I got a brown trout. Like, these things fight harder than those, Slimer rainbows in Farmington Pond. These things are neat. And yeah, they definitely are cool. So, and I agree. I would be super sad if they were just gone. Like, if somebody just said,
right,
eradicate the brown trout completely.
No,
but I also want to catch a cutthroat here and there.
Yeah. But one thing about in the fall is always you chasing the butterbellies. And when they got that golden butterbelly and the blue cheeks, I take pictures of the cheeks. Just that blue dot. It's just incredible. They're actually a really cool fish. Yeah. They're beautiful fish. And fall time is butterbelly chasing time. So.
Yeah, for sure. And you have to really give respect to the fact that those fish, those brown trout, they are an adaptable animal, and the fact that they're able to adapt to these systems and do well is, that's really respectable.
Especially the water flows, like in October when they shut the Weber off. They turn the tap off. Yeah. One day they're all fat, dumb, and happy going through a big river. The next day it's like there's nothing in here. There's barely a little water left. Give them a couple days, and they readjust and they're back at it again.
Yeah. Literally overnight.
Literally overnight. It's just how it's like, okay, it's time, and they just get used to and how they adapt. That's really cool that they can do that.
It really is.
Yeah. So we're not advocating help the Weber bonk a brown. We're just saying let's be let's be mindful of what's going on and try to make everything trying to coexist and try to find that healthy balance. Is that what that's our deal?
Let's put it this way: the brown trout are doing pretty well in the Weber. It's probably not going to hurt to take a few brown trout.
No.
And I think understanding the what we're doing for native fish is really important in the Weber, and I think that the brown trout are definitely going to be, I'm sure, a long-term part of that fishery.
Yeah.
Don't worry about taking a few home.
Yeah. Boy, catch and release, that's going to be a whole nother episode, and that's going to be very heated.
I won't
you know,
be
as
here.
far as, no. But as far as, you know, do we bonk or not bonk? Yeah,
know,
so that we'll save that for another
Oh
time.
yeah,
and-
yeah.
and-
That
and
we could go on for
Forever,
That's a good debate we could have.
it
there.
really is, yeah.
And that's great. I'm glad that we can have
that'll be
that.
our beeper.
We can bring some good scientific insight and thoughtful conversation to the
Yeah,
table.
we can
So,
do on that. But no, man, Paul, man, you're always welcome here. It's been fun. You know, you bring a lot of good information, open up people's eyes, and I'm sure everybody will really appreciate, you know, what you brought tonight. You know, just kind of a lot of people probably didn't realize everything, and I know there's got to be a lot more than we discussed as far as, you know, browns and their effects and everything like that. So yeah, it's been really informative. Thank you.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah,
so
you
thanks,
bet.
Thanks for the privilege.
Always a pleasure, sir.
Wait. He said it was a privilege to be on this show.
Oh, what did I say?
Yeah.
Oh, never mind.
No,
Nobody
you-
said
yeah, he said thanks for the privilege. It's like, sure,
No.
yeah, okay.
Sucker.
Sucker.
We tricked him.
Boy, we sure talked this up, didn't we?
Oh, I'm coming back for more. So
That's okay.
Well, we hope you do. We hope you do. We hope we can keep you.
You know, you're fun to
Here
be
on the
around, and plus
show.
you make a tasty beverage.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Man, did we even talk about that?
We
the
talked
home
about
brew
we-
thing.
No, we didn't.
We talked about the Utah. We kind of got distracted here, but Paul brought. He's a brewer
Yeah.
by hobby, and a damn fine one at that. He brews some stuff at home. He made a grapefruit. What'd you bring tonight? Yeah, a grapefruit pilsner,
Yep.
which was. I've gotten this mug. Well, I had gone now.
My pale wheat ale.
Wait, I think I mixed the grapefruit and the pale wheat.
I think you did. Yeah.
It's a very tasty beverage.
I'll have to try that next
Yeah,
time.
this is very good.
Good stuff, sir.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that.
Thank you again, and on behalf of the Leaky Waiters team, Cole, name's Brandon. We wish you all a good evening, and keep your waiters
Leaky.
leaky. Good night, everybody.
Adios.